For Labor Day weekend, I brought my kids to my custom-built lake house, only to find my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, and their kids already there, partying in full swing. What, you dragged your little rats all the way out here? We're celebrating the end of summer and the start of the school year, and you don't belong here. Get lost, my mother-in-law barked, shoving my children. These idiots had no idea who they were messing with. In a matter of minutes, I turned their lives into a living hell. But before we begin, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you, and enjoy the story. Eleanor never thought that Labor Day weekend could turn into a day that would flip her entire life upside down. That morning, she hurriedly packed her kids for the lake house, planning to spend the holiday weekend far from the hustle and bustle of the city. Her 7-year-old daughter, Daisy, spun around in front of the mirror in a new yellow dress bought specifically for the first day of first grade. Her 5-year-old son, Arthur, dragged a massive bag of toy cars, refusing to leave without his entire collection. Eleanor, or Ellie, worked as a principal architect at a prestigious firm in Chicago and was used to planning everything down to the smallest detail. The lake house in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, was her pride and joy, a modern, sprawling property on a half-acre lot that she had designed herself and built with her own money before she even got married. Every corner of the house had been meticulously planned by her, from the floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows to the radiant heated floors. It was her sanctuary, her fortress, where she came to recharge after grueling work weeks. Ellie's husband, Ian, had promised to join them that evening after an important corporate meeting. He managed the supply chain logistics department for a retail chain and often stayed late. Ellie didn't mind. She loved spending one-on-one time with her kids, especially in the place that meant so much to her. The drive to the lake house took about an hour and a half. The kids chattered happily in the back seat, discussing the upcoming school year and their plans for the weekend. Ellie smiled, listening to their chirping, anticipating a quiet evening on the deck with a cup of herbal tea. She had no idea her idyllic plans were about to turn to dust. Pulling onto her familiar street, Ellie noticed unusual activity. 3 cars she didn't recognize were parked in her driveway. One of them, a beat-up red Chevy, looked vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. Colorful balloons were tied to the porch railing, and loud music blared from the open windows. Ellie frowned as she parked near the gate. She knew for a fact she hadn't invited anyone. Furthermore, the neighbors in this upscale community always warned each other about loud parties out of courtesy. Something was very wrong. Stepping out of the car, she heard children laughing and adult voices coming from the backyard. Someone was splashing in her custom infinity pool. Ellie walked up to the gate and saw a scene that made her heart skip a beat. An entire group of strangers was lounging on her perfectly manicured lawn. A middle-aged woman in a bright orange sundress was commanding the expensive Weber grill, flipping burgers and hot dogs. Next to her, a woman in her early 30s, wearing short shorts and a crop top, was tanning on a Restoration Hardware lounger that Ellie had bought last year. 3 kids of varying ages were splashing in the pool, and several other adults sat around the patio table with wine glasses in hand. They were all acting as if they were in their own home. The woman at the grill laughed loudly at a joke. The woman on the lounger flipped lazily through a magazine, and the kids in the pool were playing water polo with an inflatable ball that definitely belonged to Arthur. Ellie stood there for a few seconds, trying to process what was happening. Was this a mistake? Did these strangers get the wrong address? No. They had clearly settled in. Their belongings were scattered all over the property: towels, bags, cheap plastic toys, paper plates. She pushed the gate open. Luckily, it was unlocked. Ellie walked into the yard, holding the hands of her quieted children, who stared in confusion at the strange crowd. The girl on the lounger noticed her first. She looked up from her magazine and stared at Ellie with unconcealed curiosity, but said nothing. Then, Ellie's attention was drawn to the woman at the grill. Something about her demeanor and loud voice seemed familiar. Ellie stepped closer, and the woman turned around. The recognition was mutual and instantaneous. It was Vera, Ellie's mother-in-law, Ian's mother, the woman with whom she had never had a good relationship, despite all of Ellie's attempts to build a bridge. Vera looked stunned to see her daughter-in-law. Her face, which a second ago had been relaxed and smug, instantly tensed. She put the tongs down on the edge of the grill and wiped her hands on a dish towel, calculating the situation. Ellie remained silent, digesting what she was seeing. Her mother-in-law at her lake house, uninvited, unannounced, with a whole group of strangers, using her house, her pool, and her grill as if she owned the place. The kids tugged at Ellie's hands. "Mommy, who are these people? Why are they in our pool?" Ellie stroked their heads, keeping her eyes locked on her mother-in-law. She felt indignation boiling inside her, but she kept her composure. She needed to handle the situation calmly and rationally. The woman on the lounger turned out to be Crystal, Ian's younger sister. Ellie rarely saw her. Crystal worked retail at a dying mall and lived with her mother in a cramped, rent-controlled apartment on the outskirts of the city. She had 2 kids from 2 different men and raised them alone, constantly complaining about a lack of money and the unfairness of life. Now, Crystal was lounging on expensive outdoor furniture in a swimsuit that was clearly brand new and beyond her usual budget. Next to her sat a bottle of expensive champagne, and the table was covered with high-end appetizers. Vera was the first to break the tense silence. "Oh, Ellie, we weren't expecting you so early." Her voice sounded strained, but she tried to maintain a facade of hospitality. Ellie noticed her mother-in-law shoot a quick glance at her guests, as if gauging their reaction to the homeowner's arrival. "I don't understand what is going on here," Ellie said slowly. "Vera, how did you get in? Who are all these people?" Her mother-in-law let out a nervous laugh. "We're just celebrating Labor Day weekend. It's a holiday for the kids before school starts. We decided to spend it out in nature instead of a stuffy apartment." She waved her hand toward the group, who were watching the drama unfold with great interest. Ellie quickly assessed the situation. There were about 6 adults plus the kids. They all looked relaxed and entitled, acting like they owned the place. "But how did you get inside?" Ellie insisted. "I have a security system and a smart lock." Vera shifted from foot to foot. Her confidence was beginning to crack. "Well, Ian gave us the code. He said you wouldn't mind." That was a blatant lie, and Ellie knew it. First, Ian never called her Ellie when talking to his mother. He always used her full name, Eleanor, because his mother demanded formalities. Second, if she had actually permitted a party at her house, she would have known the guest list and the schedule. Meanwhile, the kids in the pool noticed Daisy and Arthur and started waving them over. One of the boys, who looked about 8, yelled, "Hey, come swim, the water's awesome." Ellie recognized him as Crystal's son, Max. The second child, a 6-year-old girl, was his younger sister, Polly. The third child was a complete stranger. Daisy tugged at her mom's hand. "Mom, can we go in too?" "Not right now, sweetie," Ellie answered quietly, never taking her piercing gaze off her mother-in-law. The situation was becoming increasingly absurd. These people hadn't just trespassed. They had thrown a full-blown party, using her property and acting like they had every right to do so. Ellie pulled out her phone to call Ian and figure out what was going on. But then one of the guests approached her, a heavy-set woman in her 50s, wearing a floral dress. "Are you the homeowner?" she asked with a wide smile. "What a beautiful place. Thank you so much for letting us relax here. We've been dreaming of a getaway like this for ages." Ellie was taken aback. So, her mother-in-law had told everyone that she had permission to use the house. Furthermore, she had framed it as if Ellie had personally invited them all. "Excuse me, but I think there's a misunderstanding," Ellie began, trying to remain polite. "I never gave permission for a party here." The woman raised her eyebrows in surprise. "You didn't? But Vera said you specifically stayed in the city so we could have a nice, quiet celebration." The lies were snowballing. Her mother-in-law hadn't just deceived her. She had made her look foolish in front of strangers. Ellie felt her anger beginning to boil over. Vera, seeing that the situation was slipping out of control, rushed to intervene. "Ellie, why are you making such a big deal out of this? We're practically family. So what if we threw a little party? Nothing terrible happened." Ellie surveyed her property. The pristine white patio furniture was covered in food stains and spilled drinks. The lawn was trampled, and half of the expensive perennials in her flower beds had been crushed. Apple cores and plastic cups floated in the pool. "Nothing terrible?" Ellie repeated, steel entering her voice. "You've trashed the place." Crystal, who had been silently watching until now, decided to chime in. "Oh, come on, stop being so dramatic. We were going to clean up. Just relax and join the party." She spoke in a tone that implied she was doing Ellie a favor by allowing her to attend a party at her own house. The audacity of her sister-in-law astounded Ellie. This girl, who had lived off her mother's money her entire life and owned nothing, felt entitled to dictate terms regarding someone else's property. Just then, a man in his 40s, wearing shorts and a tank top, walked out of the house. He was carrying a tray with more raw meat for the grill. "Vera, the meat's prepped," he yelled. "Where should I put the plates?" "There's no room in the kitchen," Vera answered. "Put them on the large table in the sunroom." Ellie's blood ran cold. They were treating her home as if they had lived there for years. The man disappeared into the sunroom, and a minute later, the sound of scraping furniture echoed out. Ellie couldn't take it anymore, and followed him inside. The scene that met her eyes in the house completed her outrage. Her spacious, meticulously designed living room was a disaster zone. Strangers' clothes were tossed over her designer sofa. Empty beer cans sat on the hardwood floors, and dirty plates with half-eaten food rested on her expensive glass coffee table. The kitchen was even worse. The sink was overflowing with dirty dishes. Something was burning on the Viking stove, and the Sub-Zero refrigerator was left wide open. Someone had used her high-end espresso machine and hadn't bothered to clean it. Upstairs in the master bedroom, she found another nasty surprise. Strangers' belongings were strewn across her California king bed, and wet towels were thrown over the custom bathroom vanity. It became glaringly obvious that these people hadn't just shown up for a few hours, they had moved in. Ellie went back downstairs, feeling a hot wave of fury wash over her. She was used to keeping her emotions in check, but this crossed every conceivable boundary. "Vera," she called out, stepping back onto the patio. "I need to speak with you." Her mother-in-law approached reluctantly, still holding the BBQ tongs. "What is it, Ellie? You look pale. How long have you been here?" Ellie asked bluntly. "Oh, just since this morning. The weather was nice. We wanted to treat the kids." The lie was obvious. Based on the state of the house and the mountain of dirty dishes, they had been here for at least 24 hours, maybe more. Since the morning of which day? Ellie pressed. Vera shifted uncomfortably, realizing she was caught. "Well, we actually came up yesterday evening to set things up for the party." So they had broken into her property 2 days ago and spent 2 nights here, turning her home into a cheap motel. Ellie imagined these people sleeping in her beds, eating off her plates, using her bathrooms, and felt such intense disgust she almost gagged. While Ellie was trying to get the truth, an incident occurred that pushed her over the edge. Arthur, seeing his toys in the pool, ran toward the water but tripped over a duffel bag left on the lawn. He fell hard, scraping his knee on the edge of the stone pathway. The boy started crying from the pain and shock. Ellie rushed toward him, but Crystal beat her to it. "Hey, what are you crying for?" Crystal snapped at the 5-year-old. "Boys don't cry. When my boys fall, they don't even make a peep." She spoke to Arthur as if he were a complete stranger, offering zero sympathy. Ellie scooped her son into her arms, inspecting the scrape. "It's okay, baby. We'll go clean it up right now." She carried Arthur into the house to find the first aid kit, but another surprise awaited her in the bathroom. Her high-end cosmetics and medications had been pulled out of the medicine cabinet and dumped into a pile on the sink. Someone had clearly been rummaging through her personal belongings. Next to the first aid kit lay a pregnancy test, brand new, in the box. Ellie picked it up, bewildered. She definitely hadn't bought any pregnancy tests. Furthermore, she and Ian hadn't even discussed a third child in months. Suddenly, it dawned on her. The test belonged to Crystal. It seemed her sister-in-law hadn't just come to celebrate Labor Day. She had much bigger plans. Ellie recalled Ian's recent phone calls, which he would always abruptly end when she walked into the room. His strange nervousness over the past few weeks. His evasive answers about plans for the holiday weekend. The puzzle pieces were coming together, and Ellie hated the picture they formed. She cleaned and bandaged her son's knee and returned to the yard. The party was still going strong, as if nothing had happened. Someone turned the music up, and one of the men started dancing with Crystal. Ellie walked straight up to Vera, who was back at the grill. "I need answers to a few questions," Ellie said firmly. "And I want the truth." Her mother-in-law grimaced. "What questions?" "It's perfectly clear. It's a holiday, kids, family. First, how did you get into the house? Second, who gave you the right to invite strangers here? Third, how long do you plan on staying?" Ellie delivered each question sharply and clearly. She saw her mother-in-law getting increasingly nervous, realizing her plan was falling apart. "Ian gave us the door code," Vera finally admitted, "and we invited people because a party should be big. It's more fun for the kids." "And how long are you planning to stay?" "Well, until Sunday evening, maybe Monday morning." Ellie shook her head. Even if Ian really did give them the code, it didn't give them the right to throw a multi-day rager with strangers, and more importantly, he should have warned her. She pulled out her phone and dialed her husband's number. It rang and rang. No answer. She tried again. Sent to voicemail. Either he was truly busy in a meeting, or he was dodging her calls, knowing that sooner or later she would find out the truth. At that moment, another car pulled into the driveway. A black SUV parked next to the others, and Ian stepped out. He was carrying large paper bags from Whole Foods. Seeing his wife, he froze for a second, like a deer in headlights. A grimace of guilt and panic twisted his face. It was obvious he had zero expectation of running into Ellie here right now. "Ellie," he stammered, "why are you here so early? I thought you were coming up tonight." Those words were all Ellie needed to understand everything. Ian didn't just know about his mother's plans, he was actively facilitating them. Furthermore, he had banked on the party wrapping up before she arrived, so she would never find out. "Ian, come here," Ellie commanded in an icy tone. He approached reluctantly, still clutching the grocery bags. Ellie noticed they were filled with expensive delicacies. Artisanal cheeses, prime steaks, caviar. Definitely not the kind of food Vera usually bought for family picnics. "Explain to me what is happening here," Ellie demanded. Ian looked down. "Mom asked to have a little barbecue out in nature. I didn't think it would be a big deal." "Not a big deal. They've been here for 2 days. My house is a disaster zone, and you knew about it." Ellie's voice rose with every word. Nearby, the children, both hers and the strangers, went quiet. The guests also stopped talking, watching the family drama unfold with keen interest. "I didn't know they were staying this long." Ian tried to justify himself. "Mom said it was just for a few hours." "And you just accidentally gave them the smart lock code." Ian remained silent, and that silence spoke volumes. Ellie realized her husband hadn't just lied to her, he had betrayed her. He betrayed their family, their trust, and their shared home. "And what were you planning to do when I got here?" She continued the interrogation. "Just hope I wouldn't notice?" "I thought we'd clean everything up, and you'd never know," Ian confessed quietly. Those words were the final straw. Ellie looked at her husband and felt like she was seeing him for the first time. This weak, cowardly man who couldn't say no to his mother and was willing to deceive his own wife just to keep the peace with his family. Vera, seeing her plan implode, decided to go on the offensive. "Why are you attacking him?" She defended her son. "The boy just wanted to throw his mother a nice holiday party, and you immediately start a scandal." "He wanted to throw his mother a party in someone else's house," Ellie snapped back, without asking or getting permission. "Someone else's house?" The mother-in-law scoffed. "We're up here practically every weekend. Ian always invites us." That was a blatant lie. Vera had been to the lake house maybe 3 times total, and only for major holidays. But right now, she spoke with such confidence that even her guests believed her. Ellie realized that talking wasn't going to resolve this. These people were hostile and had no intention of leaving her property voluntarily. Moreover, they genuinely believed they were right and viewed her as ungrateful. She looked at her children, who stood nearby, huddled together in fear. Daisy was quietly crying, and Arthur was gripping his mother's hand tightly. They didn't understand the adult conflict, but they felt the tension and were terrified. For their sake, she had to act quickly and decisively. Ellie took out her phone and started dialing. Not Ian, not the police, but the one man who could solve this problem with a single phone call. "Who are you calling?" Vera asked, suddenly on guard. "Someone who will help me restore order here," Ellie answered coldly. Ian tried to grab the phone from her. "Ellie, don't. We can figure this out ourselves." But Ellie stepped back, already listening to the ringing on the line. Finally, a voice answered. "Hello, Mr. Sterling. It's Ellie Vance. I have a situation here that requires your immediate intervention." Vera and Crystal exchanged nervous glances. They didn't know who Ellie was calling, but something in her tone made them sweat. Ian went pale, realizing his wife was reaching out to powerful people from her corporate circle. The conversation was brief and strictly business. Ellie concisely outlined the situation without raising her voice or showing emotion. The man on the other end listened carefully and promised to have it handled within the hour. Ending the call, Ellie put her phone away and turned to the crowd. "You have exactly 30 minutes to pack your things and vacate my property," she stated calmly, sweeping her gaze over the silenced party. Vera was the first to recover from the shock. She stood up to her full height, her face turning purple with indignation. "What do you mean, vacate? We aren't going anywhere. This is my son's house, and I have every right to be here." Ellie shook her head. "This house is deeded exclusively in my name. I am the sole legal owner, and I am the only one who decides who is allowed on this property." Her mother-in-law snorted contemptuously. "So what if your name is on the paper? It was built with Ian's money. He told me himself how much he spent on it. So it's family property." The lie was so brazen that Ellie was momentarily left speechless. She had built this house using her own savings and bonuses before she had even met Ian. Furthermore, it was her successful architectural career that kept the family living in luxury. Ian made an average middle management salary, which barely covered his own personal expenses and car payments. "Vera, you know perfectly well that is a lie." "A lie?" "I know the truth," the mother-in-law sneered maliciously. "I know you latched onto my son like a leech. You make him work himself to the bone for you, and now you're throwing us out of our own house." Ian stood nearby, pale and lost, lacking the spine to intervene in the war between his wife and his mother. Ellie shot him a look of pure disgust. The coward couldn't even find the courage to refute his mother's lie about who paid for the house. The guests started whispering among themselves. The party mood was officially dead, but no one was rushing to pack up. Apparently, everyone was waiting to see how the family drama would end. Crystal got up from the lounger and walked closer. "Ellie, come on. Are you serious right now? We aren't strangers. We're family." Her tone held a fake note of reconciliation, but her eyes burned with malice. Ellie could see right through it. Her sister-in-law was just trying to wrest control of the situation by playing the peacemaker. Family doesn't break into a house without permission and trash the place. "What trash?" Crystal acted offended. "We're just relaxing. And anyway, what makes you think you can boss us around? Ian is just as much the boss here as you are." Ellie realized with bitter clarity that her husband's family was prepared to fight to the bitter end. Not only were they not going to apologize for the home invasion, they were demanding the right to stay. Meanwhile, the kids, terrified by the screaming adults, clung to their parents. Ellie knew the prolonged conflict was traumatizing her little ones, but giving in now meant losing control of her home forever. Vera marched up to Ian and grabbed his sleeve. "Son, tell your wife you won't let her throw your own mother out on the street. I have places to go, but it's the principle of the thing. You can't let a wife treat your family like dirt." Ian flinched, trying to pull his arm away from his mother's iron grip, but couldn't find his voice. Ellie watched the pathetic display and felt the last remaining shreds of respect for her husband evaporate. One of the guests, a middle-aged man in a Hawaiian shirt, awkwardly approached the group. "Maybe we really should hit the road? This is getting kind of uncomfortable." "Sit back down, Gary," Vera barked at him. "Nobody is going anywhere. We are legitimate guests." Ellie pulled the deed documents from her tote bag and held them out to her mother-in-law. "Here is the deed to the property. Would you like to see exactly who the legal owner is?" Vera didn't even look at the papers. "Documents can be forged. I know this place was built with my son's hard-earned money." The audacity knew no bounds. She was willing to deny concrete reality just to avoid admitting defeat. Ellie realized logic and reason were useless here. At that moment, another woman walked out of the house. A heavy-set woman in her 60s, wearing a bright bathrobe, carrying a suitcase. Vera, maybe it really is time to go home? My back is killing me from that mattress. Brenda, don't start. The mother-in-law waved her off. We are not leaving. Ellie looked closely at the stranger. It was abundantly clear these people had been sleeping in her house for days, and worse, they intended to stay indefinitely. Another man, who had been swimming in the pool, walked up. He looked around 35 and carried himself with an obnoxious swagger. Listen, gorgeous, he said to Ellie, looking her up and down. Why ruin everyone's vibe? The house is huge. There's plenty of room for all of us. Ellie recoiled in disgust. This creep was acting overly familiar in her own home, as if they were old friends. I am not interested in your opinion. Pack your things and leave. Whoa, she's a feisty one, the man smirked. Ian, buddy, is your wife always this much of a buzzkill? Ian remained silent, staring at the grass. Ellie realized with horror that her husband had been discussing her with these lowlifes, likely complaining about her behind her back. Vera seized the moment and stepped forward. Listen here, Ellie. Crystal and I have been dreaming of a nature getaway all summer. The city is hot and miserable, and it's beautiful up here. Ian invited us. We came. And we aren't going anywhere, because this is my son's house. For the last time, this is my house, and you are trespassing. Trespassing! The mother-in-law finally exploded. Who the hell do you think you are? Some stuck-up architect who married my son for his stability. You thought you bagged a rich guy, but you're just a fool. The insults poured out one after another. Vera had apparently been harboring this resentment for years and was now spewing all her accumulated venom. Ellie listened to the filthy tirade, feeling an icy calm settle over her. Crystal picked up where her mother left off. Mom is right. You think we don't see how you keep Ian completely whipped? You make him do all the heavy lifting. You raise your kids like little robots. Normal wives support their husbands. They don't boss them around. Ellie silently absorbed the accusations. At a certain point, it almost became comical. These people, who lived off her money, used her house, and exploited her hospitality, were now accusing her of being a greedy tyrant. Ian finally mustered the courage to intervene. Mom, stop. You're going too far. Too far? Vera shrieked. I am protecting my son from a dictator. Someone needs to open your eyes. She grabbed Ian by the shoulders and shook him. Look at what she's turned you into. You're afraid to speak in your own home. Where is your manhood? Ellie watched as her husband slowly crumbled under his mother's psychological pressure. Vera had always known how to manipulate her son, playing on his insecurities and guilt. And now she was using every trick in the book to turn him against his wife. Meanwhile, Crystal walked over to the kids and crouched down next to them. Why so sad, guys? Do you want to go play with your cousins? Daisy shook her head and pressed tighter against her mom. Arthur hid behind Ellie's legs. The kids intuitively sensed the adults' hostility and were terrified. Do not speak to my children, Ellie said sharply. What am I going to do to them? Crystal feigned shock. I just want them to get to know their cousins. They have no cousins among your children. Crystal jumped up as if she'd been slapped. What do you mean? We're family. Very distant relatives who have no contact with our family. Oh, so that's how it is. The sister-in-law narrowed her eyes maliciously. So we aren't family to you. Fine. I'll remember that. Ellie knew the conflict had passed the point of no return. Ian's relatives were no longer trying to maintain the illusion of peace. They were ready for total war, even if it meant destroying the family dynamic forever. Vera took the reins again. You know what, my dear daughter-in-law, we are not leaving. And not just because this is Ian's house, although rightfully it is, but because I am sick and tired of putting up with your arrogance. She stepped right into Ellie's personal space, using her larger frame to try and intimidate her. You think just because the deed has your name on it, you can push us around? You think we're afraid of you? You are severely mistaken. Ellie didn't take a single step back. I'm not asking you to be afraid of me. I am demanding that you respect my rights as the property owner. Property owner? The mother-in-law cackled. Listen to how important she thinks she is. She turned back to her group. Friends, we are being thrown out of the house that my son built with his own 2 hands. Can you believe this injustice? The guests began to mutter. They had only heard one side of the story and now viewed Ellie as a greedy, ungrateful woman throwing an elderly grandmother out on the street. The man in the Hawaiian shirt approached Ellie again. Lady, you call yourself a Christian. How can you throw an old woman and little kids out on the street? What kids? Ellie asked, genuinely confused. Well, right there. He pointed at the kids in the pool. They're just little guys. Ellie realized Vera had spun a narrative where Ellie was evicting a struggling, multi-generational family. The lies were compounding by the minute. Those children live in the city and have their own apartment, Ellie tried to explain. So what if they do? Interrupted the heavy-set woman, Brenda. Nature is better for kids. The city smog is toxic. Ellie was stunned. These people had constructed an entire echo chamber of justifications and genuinely believed they held the moral high ground. They hadn't just hijacked her house. They saw themselves as saviors, rescuing children from poor urban air quality. Crystal took advantage of the pause and loudly announced, Well, we weren't planning on leaving today anyway. We have big plans. Ellie's eyes narrowed. What plans? Her sister-in-law gave a smug, meaningful smile. You'll see. She walked over to one of her tote bags and pulled out a manila folder. Ellie recognized the distinct formatting of Wisconsin public school enrollment forms and medical vaccination records. See this? Crystal waved the papers triumphantly. These are my kids' enrollment forms for the local elementary school here. We are moving in. Ellie felt the ground drop out from under her. The invasion wasn't a spontaneous weekend getaway. Crystal planned to move in permanently, treating Ellie's multi-million-dollar lake house as her own personal free housing. You've lost your mind, she whispered. We are perfectly sane, Vera snapped. You're the psycho for throwing your own flesh and blood onto the street. The kids are already registered for the district, Crystal added. They start on Tuesday, so we are permanent residents now. Ellie turned to Ian, who was standing with a petrified look on his face. Did you know about this? He nodded slowly. Crystal asked for help with the school district. I thought it was temporary, just for a little while. She said if they didn't like it, they could transfer back. Ellie stared at her husband, realizing his naivety bordered on clinical idiocy. Either he truly believed you could just casually bounce kids between school districts, or he simply refused to take responsibility for the disaster he had enabled. Meanwhile, Crystal continued outlining her grand vision. The kids will breathe fresh country air, swim in the lake, and I'll find a job around here, or just commute to the city. It's a great setup. A terrible setup, Ellie hissed. And nobody asked you. Why should we ask? Her sister-in-law shrugged. The house is huge, there's plenty of room. We'll live like a commune. Ellie pictured that reality and shuddered. Vera, Crystal, the kids, a constant rotation of sketchy guests, noise, chaos. Her pristine, peaceful retreat would turn into a frat house. There will be no commune here, she said with absolute finality. And no one is staying. Oh, we are staying, her mother-in-law countered. I have plans too. She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her purse. Here, a doctor's note. I am medically required to be out in the fresh air. My heart, my blood pressure, my nerves. I'll drop dead in the city. Ellie took the paper and scanned it. It was a generic note printed by a local clinic doctor a week ago, generally recommending that the elderly patient spend more time outdoors for her health. Doctors hand these out to anyone who asks, she said. Maybe they do, Vera agreed. But it's a real medical document, which means I have a medical right to live here. The mother-in-law's logic was breathtakingly twisted. A generic health recommendation was being weaponized as an indefinite lease on someone else's property. Ian had been standing silently this whole time, terrified of the crossfire. Ellie walked up to him. Tell them to pack their things and leave immediately. He looked at her with miserable, pleading eyes. Ellie, maybe we really should let them stay for a bit. Mom isn't feeling well, and Crystal is struggling so much in the city with the kids. A bit? How long is a bit? A week? A month? A year? Until they get on their feet? Ellie realized her husband had completely crossed over to his mother's side. He was willing to sacrifice his own family's peace and security for his mother's parasitic comfort. Ian, if you don't tell them to leave right now, I will have the authorities remove them. What authorities? Vera scoffed. The ones you called half an hour ago. She waved her hand dismissively. You're bluffing. You didn't call anyone. And besides, who is going to help you against your own family? At that exact moment, a sleek black Lincoln Navigator pulled up to the gate. Two men in sharp, tailored suits stepped out. One was middle-aged, distinguished, and carried an aura of absolute authority. The second was young, built like a linebacker, clearly private security or a driver. Ellie exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding. Backup arrived faster than she expected. The older man walked up to the gate and offered a polite but icy greeting. Good afternoon. I am William Sterling, Senior Legal Counsel for Sterling and Vance Architecture. Eleanor requested I look into a situation. Vera looked the newcomers up and down suspiciously. And who are you supposed to be? What right do you have to be here? Every right, Sterling answered smoothly. Eleanor is a principal partner at our firm. We protect our executives' interests. He pulled a stack of documents from his leather briefcase. Here is a copy of the property deed. Here is the contact information for the Walworth County Sheriff's Department, who are on standby to execute an arrest warrant for criminal trespass. And here is the dispatch number for the towing company en route to impound the unauthorized vehicles parked on private property. He placed each document onto the patio table. Ellie watched the blood drain from the faces of the uninvited guests. They clearly hadn't expected to be hit with heavy-duty corporate legal artillery. Sterling continued in his unflappable, boardroom tone. Furthermore, my office is prepared to file civil suits for property damage, unauthorized entry, and harassment. The fines and legal fees alone will bankrupt every single person standing on this lawn. Ian stepped forward. Wait, let's not take this to extremes. We're family. We can figure this out like civilized people. The time for civilized discussion expired 30 minutes ago, Sterling replied coldly. This is now a strictly legal matter. He turned to Ellie. Would you like me to dispatch the sheriff's deputies, or will a formal warning suffice? Vera realized playtime was over. She ran to Ian and grabbed his arm. Son, don't let them do this to your mother. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. But Ian remained silent, looking at his wife with begging eyes. He was silently pleading with her not to go through with it, to not completely destroy his relationship with his family. Ellie looked at her husband and suddenly realized that her marriage had just expired, too. This weak man would never be her protector. He would always be torn between his wife and his mother, and his loyalty would always go to whoever bullied him the hardest. Bill, she said resolutely, call the sheriff. Sterling nodded and pulled out his phone. The sight of the high-powered lawyer making the call was the reality check the guests needed. They began nervously looking at each other. Several people quietly slipped away toward their cars, hoping to escape before the cops arrived. Vera saw her allies fleeing and realized the situation was critical. Her face contorted with rage. How dare you? She screamed at Sterling. What right do you have to come here? We're dealing with family business. The lawyer didn't even blink. I have the right to protect the assets of my firm's top architect. Eleanor has designed half the commercial high-rises in this state. Her reputation and peace of mind are my direct responsibility. Those words hit Ian like a freight train. For the first time, he truly grasped that his wife wasn't just an architect. She was a powerhouse in the corporate world, someone whose interests were fiercely guarded by highly influential people. Meanwhile, Crystal was pulling her kids out of the pool. Realizing the party was dead, her son Max threw a tantrum, refusing to get out. Mom, can I swim a little more? No, get out right now, Crystal snapped. She was furious. Her plans for a free luxury life were disintegrating before her eyes, and with them, her hopes for an easy ride. Polly, Crystal's youngest daughter, climbed out of the water and ran up to Daisy. Why aren't you swimming? Let's play. Daisy looked up at her mom uncertainly. Ellie shook her head. She didn't want her children socializing in this toxic environment. Not right now, sweetie. Polly got offended and ran to complain to her grandmother. Grandma Vera, That lady won't let her little girl play with me. Vera weaponized the child's complaint instantly. You see? She yelled to the remaining stragglers. She won't even let the children play together. What a monster. She marched up to Ellie and loomed over her. Have you lost your damn mind? The kids want to be friends, and you forbid it. I don't want my children participating in your circus, Ellie answered calmly. Circus? The mother-in-law shrieked. We are having a family holiday, and you are treating us like criminals. Sterling ended his call and addressed the group. Ladies and gentlemen, you have 10 minutes to vacate this private property. After that, Walworth County deputies will arrive to make arrests. The majority of the guests didn't wait around to find out if he was bluffing. They grabbed their bags and practically sprinted to their cars. Gary in the Hawaiian shirt muttered apologies as he jogged past. We'll celebrate some other time, Vera. I can't afford a record. Brenda, the heavy-set woman, waddled quickly behind him. I gotta get home. My back is acting up anyway. 5 minutes later, the only people left on the property were the family, Sterling, and his security guy. Vera stood in the middle of the empty yard, like a defeated general on a battlefield. Traitors, she muttered. Call themselves friends, and run at the first sign of trouble. Crystal chain smoked nervously by the pool. Her kids sat on a bench, confused as to why the fun had stopped so abruptly. Ellie walked up to her mother-in-law. Vera, your ride is waiting, time to pack. And what if I refuse to pack? She asked defiantly. Then you will be removed by force. The mother-in-law looked at Sterling, who stood patiently waiting. Next to him, the burly security guard stood silently, ready for action. So what? You're going to order him to drag me out? An old, sick woman? If necessary, Sterling confirmed without a trace of emotion. Vera realized her bluffs were entirely useless. These people were not going to compromise, and they were immune to emotional manipulation. She slowly walked toward the house to gather her things, but turned around at the door. Remember this, Ellie. I will never forgive you for this. You destroyed this family. You turned my son against his own mother. I protected my family from a home invasion, Ellie replied. You chose this confrontation. Her mother-in-law disappeared inside. They could hear her banging around, slamming closet doors, loudly demonstrating her outrage. Crystal finished her cigarette and crushed the butt directly into the manicured lawn. You made a big mistake, Ellie. A really big mistake. What mistake? Not letting you walk all over me. We are Ian's real family. You're just temporary. The sister-in-law spoke with such confidence, as if she knew a dark secret. Ellie frowned. Explain yourself. What's there to explain? Men always go back to their mothers, especially when their wives make their lives a living hell. Crystal shot a meaningful look at her brother, who was standing off to the side, looking at his shoes. Ian has been complaining for a month that you're driving him crazy. Work, the kids, the house. You don't give a man any freedom. Ellie turned to her husband. Is this true? You've been complaining about me to your family. Ian stayed silent, and that silence was all the confirmation she needed. So, while she was working 6 zero-hour weeks designing skyscrapers to provide for their family, he was pouring his heart out to his toxic relatives, painting her as a domestic tyrant. Men need a break from their wives, Crystal continued sanctimoniously. But you've got him chained to you. Chained by the money I make, Ellie clarified. Her sister-in-law grimaced. Finances were a sore subject for her. Money isn't the most important thing in a family. Understanding is. Understanding doesn't involve lying and betrayal. Vera emerged from the house hauling a massive duffel bag. Her face was dark, but her eyes burned with a threatening fire. I'm packed, she grumbled at Sterling. Excellent, he nodded. Shall we call your car around? I can walk. She marched up to Ian and hugged him fiercely. Son, think long and hard about whether a wife like this is worth losing your own mother over. Ian awkwardly patted her back. Mom, please, it'll be fine. Nothing will be fine, Vera snapped. Mark my words. Wives like her don't bring happiness. She started toward the gate, but suddenly stopped and spun back to face Ellie. You know what, honey? I changed my mind about leaving quietly. Sterling frowned. What is that supposed to mean? It means if I'm being thrown out, everyone is going to know the truth about this little family. Vera pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "Hello, Mrs. Higgins? It's Vera. Listen to this nightmare." Ellie knew exactly what was happening. Her mother-in-law was calling the neighborhood gossip, an elderly woman who knew everyone in Ian's hometown and lived to spread scandal. "Can you imagine? We drove all the way out to my son's lake house to surprise the kids, and his wife is throwing us out. With the police. Throwing his own mother onto the street." Vera's voice was intentionally loud, ensuring Ellie heard every word. Yes, exactly. I just wanted to throw a little back-to-school party for the grandbabies, and she flew off the handle. She has no heart." Ellie realized the smear campaign had officially launched. By tomorrow, half the town would hear a fabricated story where Ellie was the wicked, heartless daughter-in-law. "Don't worry about me, dear," Vera continued wailing into the phone. "I understand. Young people these days are so cold. They have zero respect for their elders." Sterling signaled his security guard. The large man stepped up to Vera, firmly but politely gripped her elbow. "Let's move to the vehicle, ma'am." "Get your hands off me," Vera shrieked. "I can walk." She yanked her arm away but finally moved toward the gate, continuing her theatrical phone call, painting herself as a martyr and warning her friend about the ungrateful monster her poor son married. Crystal gathered her kids and followed. Max was dragging a giant pool float, refusing to let go. "Mom, are we coming back here?" he asked. "We'll be back, buddy. We will definitely be back," Crystal promised, shooting a venomous glare at Ellie. The threat in her voice was palpable. She clearly didn't consider this defeat final. When the uninvited guests finally vacated the property, Ellie was left alone with her husband and kids. Sterling and his team departed as well, promising to send a professional cleaning crew in the morning to restore the property. Ian stood in the middle of the driveway, unsure of how to start explaining himself. Ellie silently surveyed the wreckage. It would take days to put the house back together. "Ellie, I'm so sorry," her husband finally spoke. "I didn't think it would turn out like this." "You didn't think? Or you chose not to think?" "Mom begged me. She said her doctor told her she needed to be in nature, and for that, you were willing to lie to me?" Ian looked down. "I planned to clean it all up before you got here. I thought you'd never know." Ellie looked at her husband and realized a massive chasm had opened between them. The trust that took years to build had been annihilated in a single afternoon. The kids, exhausted by the adult drama, wandered toward the house. Daisy asked quietly, "Mommy, are we going to live here?" "Of course, sunshine. This is our house." "Is Grandma Vera going to come back?" "No. She's not coming back." Ellie was certain of her words. After today, any relationship with Ian's family was permanently severed, but she had underestimated her mother-in-law's vindictiveness. 3 days later, when Ellie and the kids had finally settled into the lake house and restored some order, an event occurred that revealed the true face of Ian's relatives. On Tuesday morning, after Labor Day, Ellie was preparing to take the kids back to the city for their first day of school. Daisy was starting first grade, and it was a monumental day for the family. Ellie had prepared meticulously, ironed their new school clothes, packed special lunches, and bought a gift for the new teacher. Daisy was thrilled with her new backpack and hair ribbons. Ian had stayed in the city, citing urgent work. Since the blowout with his mother, he had been acting quiet and guilty, trying not to agitate his wife. Ellie drove the kids to their private school in Chicago. The morning drop-off and orientation went beautifully. Daisy proudly stood with the other first graders, while Arthur waved at her from the bleachers. After the ceremony, Ellie decided to take the rest of the day off and drive the kids back to the lake house for a special first day of school celebration. She bought a custom cake, ice cream, and planned a quiet family evening. Pulling up to the familiar property, Ellie noticed the front gate was wide open. Voices and music were echoing from the backyard again. Her heart dropped. Did they actually come back? Ellie parked and got out. The scene was even worse than the first time. There was a massive crowd of people on her lawn, at least 10 adults and just as many kids. Vera was standing at the grill surrounded by unfamiliar women. Crystal was tanning on the same RH lounger, deliberately ignoring the homeowner's arrival. Kids were splashing in the pool, and a long buffet table was set up on the patio. Ellie walked through the gate, holding Daisy and Arthur by the hands. The kids were still in their nice school clothes. Her mother-in-law spotted them first. Her face twisted into a vicious sneer. "What, you dragged your little rats all the way out here again? We're celebrating the start of the school year, and you don't belong here. Get lost." With those words, Vera marched up to the children and shoved Daisy hard in the chest. The little girl stumbled backward and fell, scraping her elbow hard against the stone pathway. Arthur started crying in terror. These idiots had no idea who they were messing with. In a matter of minutes, I turned their lives into a living hell. Ellie helped her daughter up, inspected the scrape on her elbow, and felt a switch flip deep inside her brain. Cold, calculating fury flooded her system, erasing all doubt and hesitation. She pulled out her phone and hit a speed dial number. The connection was instantaneous. "Bill. It's Ellie. Execute full protocol." Scorched earth. Her voice was dead calm, but anyone who knew Ellie well would recognize the extreme danger in her tone. Sterling asked a few clarifying questions. Ellie answered briefly. "Yes, exactly that. Full maximum penalty. The clock starts now." She put the phone away and turned to her mother-in-law, who was still standing there looking smug. "Vera, you just made a catastrophic mistake." "What mistake?" The older woman scoffed. "Telling the truth to your little rats? You touched my children." Ellie's voice carried an intonation so dark and absolute that even Crystal looked up from her magazine, suddenly on high alert. "So what?" Vera puffed out her chest. "You going to call the cops on their own grandmother?" "I won't need to call the cops." Ellie sat down on a patio bench and hugged her crying children. "Tell me, Vera, what clinic do you work at again?" The mother-in-law was thrown off by the sudden question. "Why do you care?" "Just curious." "Mercy General Hospital." "I'm an orderly." "And what about you, Crystal? Where do you work?" "The Macy's, at the Galleria Mall." "What are you getting at?" Vera demanded. Ellie nodded, logging the information. "Ian, where exactly does your mother rent her apartment?" Ian, who had just walked out of the house looking horrified, stammered out the address. Ellie pulled a small notebook from her purse and wrote it down. "Ellie, why do you need those addresses?" Ian asked, his voice shaking. "You'll see." Ellie stroked her kid's hair. "Daisy, Arthur, let's go inside, wash up, and have some cake." She stood up and headed for the sunroom, but Crystal blocked her path. "Hold on, we're eating in there." "There's no room." "There's no room in my house?" "In our house," the sister-in-law retorted arrogantly. Ellie looked at her closely. "Crystal, you work retail making maybe $15 an hour. You rent a cramped, rent-controlled apartment for $1,200 a month. How exactly do you plan to support 2 kids in a wealthy lakefront district where the cost of living is triple?" Crystal faltered. "I'll figure something out. Or get government assistance. Welfare?" "Interesting." Ellie spoke as if she were taking deposition notes. Crystal sensed a trap but didn't know where it was coming from. "And where are your kids going to school?" "The local elementary." "Yeah, they're already enrolled." "Show me their proof of residency." Crystal looked confused. "Proof of what?" "A lease agreement or utility bills in your name. Without those, the district will flag it as enrollment fraud and expel them." I left them at the apartment." "Convenient." Ellie continued her rapid-fire questioning, and with every answer, it became glaringly obvious that Crystal hadn't planned anything. She just decided to hijack a rich lifestyle and hoped for the best. "What about the IRS?" "What about them?" "You sell gray market goods and used clothes online, don't you?" "Poshmark, Depop." "Do you claim that $1,099 income on your taxes?" Crystal's face dropped. She clearly hadn't considered the paper trail. "I'll figure it out." "You won't figure it out, because I'm reporting you for tax fraud." "What is your problem?" Vera interjected. "Ian, tell your wife she can't talk to us like this. We have a right to visit." Ian remained silent. He was beginning to grasp the sheer magnitude of the catastrophic hurricane he had brought upon his family. Ellie walked up to her husband. "You have a choice to make, Ian. Either you finally stand up and defend your wife and children, or you go down with your toxic family. That is an ultimatum. This will never happen again." Ian was paralyzed. On one hand, his wife was entirely right. His mother and sister had crossed every legal and moral line. On the other hand, he couldn't just completely cut off his own flesh and blood. What if I just make Mom promise never to do it again? Her promises are worthless. Then what do you want me to do? A total, permanent ban on your family stepping foot on this property. Ever. Ian flinched. That's too cruel. They chose cruelty the second they laid hands on my daughter. Ellie took the kids and walked into the house. Behind her, she could hear Ian frantically calling his mother, trying to reason with her, but it was too late. The wheels of vengeance were already in motion. An hour later, a sleek Mercedes pulled up to the gate. Bill Sterling stepped out, carrying a thick leather binder. Ellie met him on the porch. Thank you for getting here so fast. Always here for our top partners. Where are the files? Ellie handed him a folder containing all the property deeds and camera footage. Sterling reviewed them with a predator's smile. Ironclad. Classic case of familial squatting and harassment. We're going scorched earth. He opened his iPad. Step 1. Restraining orders and criminal trespass notices for the entire property. Step 2. Triggering audits and employer reviews. Step 3. Maximum financial and civil consequences. Ellie nodded. She was ready to take it to the absolute limit. How long will this take? A week. 2. Max. Sterling departed, leaving Ellie to wait for the fallout. The kids quickly settled back into the lake house, enjoying the fresh air. Daisy read her new books, and Arthur built forts in the living room. Ian only drove up late at night to sleep, spending his days in the city. Ellie knew he was avoiding the inevitable confrontation about their marriage. A week later, Sterling called with a progress report. It is done. Tomorrow morning, they get hit with the paperwork. What exactly? Permanent injunctions barring them from the Lake Geneva property. A lease termination notice from Crystal's landlord for operating an illegal commercial business out of a residential unit, and Vera's termination papers from the hospital. Ellie paused. Bill, isn't getting her fired a bit extreme? They crossed the line the moment they assaulted your child. Mercy General Hospital leases their real estate through our corporate partners. One phone call about an orderly, with a history of unhinged behavior and trespassing, was all it took. Extreme is letting people who threaten your family get away with it. The next day, Ian sped up to the lake house, looking pale and frantic. Ellie, what did you do? Mom just got fired. Crystal's landlord is evicting her. I didn't do anything but protect my rights. How is getting them fired protecting your rights? Mom says some corporate lawyers showed up at the hospital. They told HR she was a liability. Crystal is getting thrown out on the street. Ellie continued making lunch for the kids, not even looking at him. That's unfortunate. Unfortunate. Ellie, this is my family. My mother might end up homeless. You should have thought about that before you did this. She should have thought about that before she assaulted my daughter. Ian grabbed his head. You don't understand. Mom is panicking. She says private investigators have been knocking on her neighbors' doors. The whole building knows she's in trouble. Ellie finally looked up. And what do you want me to do about it? Call it off. Tell your lawyers to leave my family alone. No. Ian was stunned by the absolute finality in her voice. What do you mean, no? It's very simple. Your mother crossed a line from which there is no return. Ellie, they're family. We can't just destroy them. I can. And I did. Ellie wiped her hands, walked into the living room, and grabbed the kids' coats. Daisy, Arthur, let's go for a bike ride. The kids cheered and ran for the door. Ellie followed them, leaving Ian standing alone in the massive kitchen. That evening, Sterling called again. Eleanor, update. Your in-laws attempted to file a police report claiming unlawful eviction and harassment. And the sheriff laughed them out of the station, informed them that their own actions constituted criminal trespass and breaking and entering. The complaint was instantly dismissed. But be prepared. They will try to pressure you through Ian, through extended family, through the community. Dig in for a siege. Sterling was right. Within 48 hours, Ian's phone was blowing up. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends called to berate him for letting his evil wife abuse his poor, elderly mother. Vera played the victim masterfully. She spun a tragic tale of how her son, brainwashed by his rich, wicked wife, threw his own mother out into the cold. Ian was cracking under the psychological pressure. He became irritable, couldn't sleep, and started screwing up at work. "Ellie, please, isn't this enough?" he begged one night. "Mom promises she'll never do it again. Her promises are bankrupt. But she's completely alone now." Crystal had to move into Mom's tiny one-bedroom apartment with the two kids. "Do you have any idea how miserable they are? I can imagine. And I don't care." Ellie's icy detachment terrified Ian. He was used to the soft, compromising Ellie who always tried to keep the peace. Now, he was facing a completely different woman, ruthless, unyielding, and prepared to go to war. Meanwhile, the consequences for his family were snowballing. Vera truly had lost her job. Officially, she was let go for restructuring, but everyone knew the real reason. The hospital administrators didn't want to cross the architectural firm that designed their multi-million-dollar expansions. Crystal was formally evicted. Her landlord, suddenly hyper-aware of lease violations after a call from Sterling's office, gave her 30 days to vacate. With nowhere else to go, she crammed herself and her two kids into Vera's tiny apartment. But the worst was yet to come. 2 weeks later, Crystal received a certified letter from the IRS. It turned out she was being audited for unreported income. While working retail, she was spending way beyond her means. Where was the money coming from? The IRS was very curious. Ellie knew the answer. Crystal had been running a gray market reselling hustle online, dodging taxes for years. A simple anonymous tip, with a few screenshots of her Poshmark and Venmo accounts, blew her underground business wide open. Ian tried to defend his sister. "Ellie, everyone does side hustles. Everyone does them, but not everyone gets caught. Did you report her to the IRS?" Ellie shrugged. "I simply forwarded public information to the appropriate regulatory body." The IRS hit Crystal with $30,000 in back taxes and penalties. For a single mother making minimum wage, it was a death sentence. Vera, learning of her daughter's catastrophic debt, went into hysterics. She called Ian 10 times a day, demanding he bail Crystal out. "Son, you can't let your sister drown. She has little babies." Ian was torn between pity for his family and the terrifying realization that his wife was absolutely in the right. He tried to scrape together some cash, but his salary barely made a dent. "You want to help her?" Ellie asked him one evening, watching him stress over his bank account. "Of course I do. She's my sister." "Then get a second job, drive for Uber, because you aren't using a dime of our joint accounts." "Ellie, my check isn't enough to cover a $30,000 IRS lien. Then I guess she better start a GoFundMe." Ellie was immovable. She refused to spend a single cent of the money she worked 6-hour weeks for on people who insulted her and assaulted her children. The situation reached a boiling point when Vera decided to confront Ellie directly. The mother-in-law bypassed security at Ellie's downtown architectural firm and caused a massive scene right in the lobby. "Ellie, I am begging you," she wailed, crying theatrically in front of Ellie's stunned colleagues and wealthy clients. "Call off your lawyers. Crystal and the babies are going to be on the street." Ellie walked out of the glass-walled conference room. "Vera, leave this building immediately. I won't leave until you promise to fix this." "Security," Ellie called out calmly. 2 large security guards quickly but firmly escorted the screaming woman out the revolving doors. She shrieked the entire way about the cruelty of rich people, but no one batted an eye. Ellie's colleagues knew her as a fair, principled professional. If she had gone nuclear on this woman, they knew the woman absolutely deserved it. Bill Sterling walked out of his corner office after the incident. "Family issues, former family issues. I have it handled. Thank you, Bill. Say the word Ellie. We protect our own." Ellie was grateful. Unlike her husband, her corporate family understood loyalty and having a backbone. Meanwhile, Crystal's situation grew desperate. The IRS lien hung over her head like a guillotine. She had no job, a destroyed credit score, and finding a new apartment with an eviction on her record was impossible. She tried applying for emergency housing, but the waitlists in Chicago were years long. Vera was equally trapped. Unemployed, living off a meager pension. She could barely feed herself, let alone her daughter and 2 grandkids. Ian was agonizing over their poverty. "Ellie, isn't there a way out of this?" he pleaded. "There is. Your mother must issue a formal, written apology for assaulting my daughter and insulting my children, and both of them must sign a legally binding NDA and a permanent stay-away order regarding our family. And then you'll help Crystal with the IRS? I will do absolutely nothing for Crystal. She committed tax fraud. She can face the federal government on her own." Ian realized his wife was completely unbending. Her unshakable principles, which he used to admire, now felt like a firing squad. He tried to broker peace with his mother. "Mom, please, just apologize. Do it for the grandkids." "Never," Vera spat. "I didn't do anything wrong. You shoved Daisy to the ground. I barely touched her." She's a drama queen who started wailing for attention. Vera refused to concede an inch. In her mind, she was a flawless martyr persecuted by an evil billionaire daughter-in-law. A month passed. The stalemate held. Vera and Crystal lived in poverty, but stubbornly refused to apologize. Ian was torn apart, growing increasingly depressed and distant. Ellie, however, was thriving. Her career skyrocketed after the firm's partners saw how ruthlessly and efficiently she handled corporate-level threats to her personal life. She was promoted to senior partner and given a massive bonus. The kids were happier than ever. They spent their weekends running free at the lake house, safe from toxic relatives and screaming grandmothers. But Ellie knew the final reckoning with Ian was approaching. Their marriage was a hollow shell. The climax arrived in late October. Crystal, driven mad by her circumstances, made a desperate, unhinged move. She drove up to the Lake Geneva house late one night when Ellie was alone with the kids. Crystal hopped the security gate and sprinted onto the lawn. Ellie saw her on the security cameras from the kitchen. Crystal was standing in the middle of the yard, screaming, "Ellie, come out here, we need to talk." Ellie stepped out onto the back deck, her phone already in her hand. "Crystal, get off my property." "I won't. You destroyed my life. Now I'm going to destroy yours." Crystal was clearly having a mental breakdown. Months of poverty and IRS threats had broken her. "You have everything. A mansion, money, a career. And I have nothing. Because of you. You did this to yourself." "I did this? You ruined us over a barbecue." Crystal stepped closer. In her hand, she held a heavy landscaping rock. "You know what? If I can't live in this fancy house, neither will you." She reared her arm back, aiming for the massive, custom floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the living room. Ellie calculated instantly. The kids were asleep right above that room. Shattering glass would terrify them. She vaulted over the deck railing and tackled Crystal's arm before she could throw it. "Drop the rock." "I won't. You think I'm scared of you." Crystal thrashed wildly, but Ellie held her wrist in an iron grip. Years of Pilates and tennis gave her a distinct physical advantage. "Crystal, walk away right now." "No. I'm going to come here every night. I'm going to break every window in this place. Then we'll do this the hard way." Ellie pulled up her phone and hit her emergency speed dial. "Walworth County 911. I have an intruder at my residence. She is armed with a weapon, actively threatening to destroy property and harm my children." Crystal tried to slap the phone away, but Ellie easily dodged it. "The address is on file. Yes, the intruder is highly erratic and violent." The police arrived in under 5 minutes with lights flashing. Crystal was handcuffed and shoved into the back of a cruiser. Ellie filed a formal police report for attempted vandalism, trespassing, and assault. Ian sped up to the lake house an hour later, frantic. "What happened?" "Crystal called me from the precinct, screaming, 'Your sister tried to put a rock through our living room window.' That's impossible. I have it in 4K on the Ring cameras." She had a mental break. Ian collapsed onto the patio steps, burying his face in his hands. "Ellie, what have we done? My family is completely destroyed. You did this." "I simply defended my home. Can't we at least post her bail?" "Is no." "Why are you so cruel?" Ellie sat down next to him. "Ian, I am not cruel. I am consistent. Your mother and sister declared war on me and my children. Now they are experiencing the consequences of war. They just wanted a vacation. It was a calculated, premeditated home invasion. The school enrollments, the medical notes, the fake party guests. It was a hostile takeover. Ian fell silent. He knew she was right. It wasn't a spontaneous BBQ. It was a parasitic coup. "So what happens now?" he asked numbly. "Now, you make your final choice. Either you permanently cut ties with them, or you cut ties with me. Ellie, that's an impossible ultimatum. It's a boundary. I refuse to live in constant fear that your unhinged family is going to show up to harm my children." Ian agonized. The choice between his mother and his wife paralyzed him. But time passed, and he made no move to cut them off. He kept secretly sending them money and visiting them in the city. Ellie was done waiting. A month later, she filed for divorce. Not out of malice, but out of the cold realization that being married to a man without a spine was a liability she could no longer afford. Ian was devastated. "Ellie, please don't do this. We can go to counseling. There's nothing to counsel. You made your choice. But the kids will stay with me, and they will grow up in a home where they are protected and respected." The divorce was fast and brutal. With Sterling representing her, Ellie decimated Ian in court. She didn't even ask for child support. Her income dwarfed his anyway. She got full custody, the primary residence, and the lake house. Ian got standard every other weekend visitation, but Daisy and Arthur rarely wanted to go. They remembered how their father had stood by while their grandmother shoved them, and children have very long memories. Vera viewed the divorce as a massive victory. "Finally, he's free from that corporate witch," she celebrated. But her joy was severely misplaced. Left alone, Ian spiraled into a deep depression. He realized he hadn't just lost his wife. He had lost his entire meticulously curated life. Without Ellie's drive and financial backing, his lifestyle imploded. He had to rent a small apartment. His mother and sister, sensing he was vulnerable, swarmed him. They drained his bank accounts, guilt-tripping him into paying their rent and bills until he was essentially their indentured servant. 6 months later, Ian showed up at Ellie's downtown office, looking exhausted and broken. "Ellie, I made a massive mistake. Please, let's try again." "No, Ian, it's over." "Why? I've changed." "You haven't changed. You just got tired of dealing with the consequences of your own weakness. You want back into the comfortable life I built. But the kids, they miss their dad. They miss a dad who protects them, not a dad who lets his mother treat them like garbage." Ian tried a few more times, but Ellie's boundaries were made of titanium. She had learned her lesson. Meanwhile, Vera tried to maintain her psychological chokehold on her son. She feigned heart attacks, orchestrated drama, and weaponized her guilt. "I'm your mother. How can you abandon me?" "Mom, I'm broke. I have nothing left." Ian eventually stopped answering her calls. The divorce had taught him that peace was better than family loyalty, but it was too late to save himself. Crystal never managed to dig herself out of the IRS hole. She declared bankruptcy. Because she was unemployed, living in squalor, and had a recent arrest record, Child Protective Services intervened. Max and Polly were temporarily placed in foster care until Crystal could prove she had a safe, stable environment. Only then did she truly realize that her arrogant war against Ellie had cost her everything that mattered. Vera lived out her final years in that cramped, run-down apartment, completely alone. Ian rarely visited. Her grandchildren from Crystal were in the system, and Ellie's kids didn't even know she existed. Crystal blamed her mother for instigating the entire disaster, and they rarely spoke. As for Ellie, she built a magnificent new life. 3 years later, she married a fellow senior partner at her architecture firm, a strong, decisive man who valued his family above all else and would never let anyone disrespect his wife. The lake house remained their private sanctuary. The kids grew up there, remembering it as a fortress where they were always fiercely loved and protected. Sometimes, when Ellie drove through the city past the rundown neighborhood where Vera lived, she would spot her former mother-in-law sitting on a bus stop bench. The old woman would glare at Ellie's passing, Mercedes with pure, unadulterated hatred, but she never dared make a move. She had learned the hard way that there are some people you simply do not mess with, especially a mother who has the power and the capital to protect her children at any cost. Ellie never regretted a single thing. She taught her children that justice exists and that cruelty will be punished. The lesson cost her a marriage, but the trade-off was worth it. Her children grew up safe, knowing their mother would burn the world down to keep them secure. 5 years passed. Daisy was in middle school, already drawing blueprints, dreaming of becoming an architect like her mom. Arthur was in 4th grade and obsessed with robotics. One summer afternoon, lounging by the infinity pool at the lake house, Daisy asked casually, "Mom, why did we stop seeing Grandma Vera?" Ellie adjusted her sunglasses, choosing her words carefully. "Because she was very mean to you guys when you were little, and I do not forgive people who hurt my kids." "What if she said she was sorry?" Arthur asked. "If she ever did, we'd see." But the apology never came. Vera took her stubborn pride to the grave, never realizing that her entitlement had cost her an entire family. Ellie built a new empire on the ashes of her old life. She proved to herself and the world that a woman can be powerful, principled, and utterly lethal when crossed. The lake house remained her castle, a place where no one dared threaten her peace. And everyone in Chicago corporate circles knew one universal truth: you do not mess with Eleanor Vance.